Okay, so as I mentioned, my name is Tim Harris. I've been a member of the parish for about 26 years, and I'm a cradle Catholic, born into a family of 7 in the middle part of the country in Wisconsin. And I enjoyed, at times, and suffered at times, the old school parenting from a Catholic mom and Catholic dad. I think, on balance, enjoyed it. And I have had the opportunity to celebrate 6 of the 7 sacraments that our faith and that the church provides. Not all here, but I celebrated my baptism, my first communion, reconciliation, and confirmation in the middle part of the country. And then out here I celebrated Holy Matrimony. I've been anointed for the anointing of the sick, so it's just holy orders left on my sacramental scorecard that's unchecked. And I am married to, very happily married for 25 years, to a non-Catholic spouse. That's becoming more and more popular these days. And inside of my large family, we have a couple of Catholic marriages and then some Catholic non-Catholic marriages. Again, I think that's important and relevant for us to think about and talk about when we talk about parenting. I raised 3 children. I'm not quite done with one of them, but I've more or less raised 3 children, all within the church. And I was able to take advantage of Catholic high schools here in the area, and for at least one of my children, Catholic University. All 3 of my kids were born and raised here in this parish. So some of the remarks that I'm going to share with you are going to be very specific to raising a kid out here. And I'm certainly not qualified to give any parenting advice. That was a condition to me agreeing to come up here and share, because that's all I'm doing is just sharing with you what I and my wife have done. Some of it has worked, some of it hasn't worked, but I'm just speaking to you just as a guy who's raised 3 kids, starting around the turn of the millennium, starting around the year 2000. My kids are 22, 20, and 17 right now. And in preparing my thoughts for today, I gathered together, I think, 2 or 3 points that I think our parents, would say are timeless parenting points, but I think are still relevant today. And then I tried to capture a couple that, our parents would say, "What? What are you talking about? How is that relevant?" I think there's some stuff that we have to deal with today that our parents didn't have to. But I'll start with what I would consider the timeless points, but I think they're really worth us embracing. And the first one is just to live the faith by example to your kids. You'll never quite, nothing ever hit me at home more deeply than when I started to see my kids either emulate good habits or repeat bad habits, particularly language. The first time your child drops something at home, you wonder, how did that happen? That's when your spouse will say, "Yeah, that's you in the garage," or "That's you in the backyard." But I think as parents, we all in some way, shape, or form want to hear those words from Matthew 25, when we're all done here on earth. We want to hear God say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." And raising children is definitely service. It's service to them, it's service to each other if you're raising a child with your spouse, and it's service to God. So I think you want to be really thankful, and I think we all do a great job of that with our children. And they're adorable, and they're sweet, and they're cuddly, and they accept your hugs and your kisses. But it can become a little bit more difficult when they become trying, especially those teen years. But just to remember and to always express in front of your kids how thankful you are for the blessing that God's given you with your children. And I like to say to kids in these days, and this is one of the points that I'll hit at the end of new things that we have to deal with that our parents didn't have to. There are a lot of kids that don't hear enough that they're perfect. And I don't mean like perfect soccer player, perfect student, perfect athlete, but just that you were made exactly the way God wanted to make you. You're not broken, you're not damaged, and as I like to say in the religious ed classes, God doesn't make junk. He doesn't make mistakes, he doesn't make junk. Now there's just an endless barrage on kids these days of how they're not perfect and how they're not like this model or that model. But I think we have to keep telling kids what an incredible joy it is to have you. You are absolutely perfect. God made you specifically for me and Mom. We're so thrilled to have you. Another point is to seek forgiveness and also to be forgiving. I think it's pretty easy, to be forgiving. We've heard that over and over since we were little kids. But to seek forgiveness from your kids. We're not perfect. It's great for our children to learn that they're being raised by imperfect human beings. Take some of the pressure off yourself. Father Jerome spoke last week about taking a break as a parent. We're not perfect, and when we're not, it's of course very, very hard to look in the mirror and realize that you weren't perfect in something you did in the last week or two. But I've noticed as my kids have gotten older how incredibly powerful it is and how maturing it is of your relationship with your child when you go to a child and you ask a child for forgiveness. I've had to do that, and your kids just, they hear it and they say, wow, Mom or Dad is asking, they're apologizing, and they're wanting me to forgive them. And your kids will hold you up on a pedestal, so don't run around and do bad things just so you can seek forgiveness from your kids. But as they get older, and you have things that you think about that you wish you'd done differently, talk to your kids about it. It'll strengthen that bond with them. And of course, make them more forgiving people and more seeking of forgiveness. Obviously, this is an old school, timeless point, but getting to Mass and getting to confession. And there's the physical act of setting the alarm and actually getting here. But I think that the Mass, extending that throughout the course of the day, extending it throughout the course of the week if you can. If you are able to attend Mass with your child and you're able to sit and listen to the homily, and I had the crying, screaming kids for all those years, so I know you don't always get that every Sunday. But if you do, and you can talk to your kids throughout the course of the week, like, wow, that gospel that we heard today, that was really good advice on how we should treat these refugees that we're reading about in the news or that you're studying about in your history class. And on getting to confession, also showing your children that that's a revitalizing, that's a recharging of batteries. It's a strengthening thing that you do, and it's not a chore and it's not a burden. Obviously, an old school point, which is timeless, is praying, both with your kids and in front of your kids, and not just praying here during the Mass, but praying before you travel. You say, quick prayer on the plane, quick prayer in the airport, quick prayer before you leave home, praying before medical procedures and surgeries, praying for your ailing parents. For those of us that are in that sandwich generation, you're taking care of kids, but you're also watching our parents age. And then, even Sister Helen taught me when I was little, there's nothing too mundane. It's all right for kids to pray before a test. Yes, they can. You can say a prayer when you're dropping them off at school, or when you're having Fruit Loops in the morning and they've got a math test that they've been stressed about, because you're teaching your children that vulnerability and that openness that we can't control everything in this world, but we can definitely control our conversation with God. And I love when my kids, especially my college kids, will call me up and they're overwhelmed with 110 things. I'll say, just work on the things that you can control, like your sleep and your diet and that sort of stuff, and then pray for the rest. We're programmed as parents, especially when they're really little, to want to assure them that you can provide them with everything they need and you can protect them from all harm. I think that's good. Kids need to grow up feeling that way, that they're in a safe home. But it's also very powerful for a parent to show a child that we're vulnerable and there are some things that we can't control. And when those hit us in life, and a child says, what are you going to do for grandma or grandpa? The answer is, I'm going to pray for them. And then the last point maybe is, I'm not sure if it's a timeless point, but money is such an important part of the world that we live in today, including, but not limited to mental part. But explaining and involving your children in any charitable activities that you participate in. I think this is really important for those of you who have teens or preteens, because now people have a credit card and their iPhone, and they run around to the bagel store, and the kids are spending parents' money. As your teenagers are learning the importance of what it is you do to earn that money, and why you cut corners and wear old sneakers, to save money, explain to your kids why you do the charitable giving that you do. And the dollar amount doesn't matter. It's the same lesson whether you're giving $10 or you're giving $10,000. It's really important, I think, for the children to see that your support for the church, it carries a lot more weight when your kids see what you do. And you will find yourself engaged in what I think are good discussions. Dad, why are you giving that money to the church? Why don't you give that directly to a poor person on the street? Again, it's all about emulation. The kids will see what you do. So that's kind of living your faith by example. The second big point, which I think is a timeless one, is don't harp on all the negative in the world. Be sure to point out the many instances of love and hope in the world. And I spoke at St. Francis High School to 2 religion classes last week, and I just asked the kids, and they were totally unprepared for this. The teacher did not tip them off that I was going to ask, what are the things that you worry about? What causes you anxiety? And no hands went up, just a blurt and just an incredible laundry list, a little bit scary. Social injustice, global warming, war, terrorism, cyberbullying, school shootings right here, academic competition, college selectivity, and then varying degrees of the kids being able to articulate economic concerns, the economic headwinds. Mom or dad is worried about their job or worried about their retirement savings or whatever. And I'm reminded of, I read an article, I forget where it was, after one of the school shootings, when somebody pointed out that Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, who most of us watched at some point in time growing up, I don't think he said it on a show, but I think he said it during an interview once, where he said, if you're with your kids and there's something horrible and terrible going on and you can't shield them from it, looking at the news, tell them in every tragedy to look for the good people. There's always a police officer, a firefighter, there's always an ambulance, there's always a teacher jumping in. There are heroes that are out there. They unfortunately don't capture and grab as many headlines as the villains of the world today. But don't harp on all the negative in the world. You can't be Pollyannish. You gotta talk to your kids about the negative in the world, but you gotta point out all the instances of hope and love, because people who do ministry, particularly in young people who are attracted to street gangs, it's the number one. It's the best. It's Satan's best recruiter. You don't have any hope. You've got nothing to hope for. So come on over here. I'll give you a jacket. I'll give you a knife. I'll give you a gun. And you have a place here. And then empowering youth. I think there is a growing sense, I hope it's not futility, but there's a growing sense, I think, amongst young people, look at the world we're handing over to them. Look at all the problems the world has. Now, I think our parents handed over a world to us that had a lot of problems. Maybe it wasn't written about, or maybe it wasn't blasted in our faces the way things are today. But I try to tell the teenagers, you're the most well-informed, certainly the most well-connected, certainly the most rapidly communicative voice and platform generation ever to grow up in this country. So your ability to effect change far exceeds any other generations. And there's a great graduation speech of a retired admiral. I think it's the 2014 commencement speech at the University of Texas. And he talks about, I think there were 8,000 graduates that day. He talked about, if each of you go help 8 people in the course of the next year, and they help 8 people, and they help 8 people, it's not very far at all. It's not too many years before that graduating class has affected the world's whole population. So don't harp on the negative. Make sure the kids know that they have a chance of a good life. And then the last maybe timeless point is to engage in interfaith activities. That becomes more relevant and more important if you happen to be in a Catholic, non-Catholic marriage. But there are so many opportunities, and a lot of families are already doing things like this. You will meet people if you go volunteer at Second Harvest Food Bank and either pack the boxes or be one of the people who puts the boxes in the cars when the food insecure families drive up. You'll be working alongside people from mosques and temples and churches from all over the place. Talking religion with your relatives and with your family friends so that your children's faith is not either a taboo topic to be avoided, and also not a topic to be confined to just 1 hour on Sundays. Where I will engage my kids in this is, why is it that so many athletes are giving all praise and glory to God in their post-game interviews? You know, they come fresh off the field. I think we saw 4 examples of it yesterday, and it's one of the first things that people are thinking of. So the kids' faith can't be limited to just that 1 hour on Sunday. And then expressing your admiration for the work that other faiths engage in, and expressing your admiration for the cultural or faith traditions of other faiths is all fantastic, because post 2000 or 2010 divisiveness has really tried to jump onto and tried to make huge canyons between us over tiny little differences. So pointing out the shared beliefs, because whether it's peace be with you, whether it's shalom, whether it's salam alaikum, there is a shared common belief across almost all faiths that we're all children of the same family, and we were meant to love and care for one another. I think maybe that's one of the things, and I'm speaking very narrowly about just my parents, but there can be a tendency for people to say, no, the Catholic Church runs these schools in this school district, or the Catholic Church runs this hospital, and I don't want to go to another hospital. Now you go to a Catholic hospital, and the chances that you have a Catholic doctor or nurse caring for you are quite small. So those are kind of my timeless points, would be live the faith by example, don't harp on the negative, be sure to point out the positive, and engage in interfaith activities. Now for the juicy stuff. I had the benefit of talking to some parents at our high school, but then also some of my siblings who are parents. Putting that stuff to the side, what are things that mom and dad did not have to teach us in their parenting example? And I think I have these in the order of what at least interests me the most or threatens me the most. And the first is to be very hyper-aware of the impact of divisiveness in the world today on your child's faith and on your child's pride in being Catholic and being part of the Catholic Church. Religion itself is under attack. Religious affiliation has now become incredibly politicized, and people will very quickly jump to conclusions about those people who identify as Catholics. They'll say, oh, well, you're Catholic, then you must be for, and against. I can't possibly be friends with you, and you're evil, and all that kind of stuff. Because many non-religious people, and I suppose some religious people, don't distinguish between their faith and the teachings of their faith and the imperfect human institutions that operate on this planet. And that includes our church. That includes the Catholic Church. Your children are taking history classes, your children are reading news, and guess what? The Catholic Church hasn't always been perfect. Now, is that a reason to reject the Catholic faith and to reject Jesus' teachings? I would say no. I think a lot of you would knee-jerk react and say, of course not. You better teach that to your kids, because this problem of the children getting religious education through their teen years and then going off to their young adulthood who choose not to follow it, I bet you, if you did a survey, a lot of them would say, I can't possibly follow the Catholic Church and follow the Catholic faith because of this thing or that thing, these atrocities that have happened. Today's teens, and this may not be any worse now than it was a generation ago, but today's teens are constantly being tempted to reject and rebel against the choices that you've made, including your faith. They're just, advertising campaigns, don't wear your dad's pants, Don't wear sneakers of the kind that your dad would wear. You certainly don't have a hairdo the way your dad would wear. All of a sudden, the things your dad did are bad. People will try to sell you things that are very unlike your parents, whether that's your hairstyle, piercings, tattoos, whatever. And in conversations, and this is for parents of, I think, older children, high school and beyond, Catholicism is not a single faith issue. I've had to have very strong debates. I have a child now who's a student at the University of Notre Dame, so she's surrounded by the Congregation of the Holy Cross, and she has to take theology classes. But she's also on a college campus with young, free-thinking, challenging people. And we've had a lot of conversations about Catholicism not being a single issue faith. Our faith, and then certainly the practices of our church, have evolved over time and will continue to evolve. So Catholics can and do very much disagree with each other on certain issues, but don't ever let your children abandon their faith over a single issue or a disagreement with an imperfect human institution. So that's being hyper-aware of divisiveness. And the mechanism that hits us with, I already had one conversation this morning, being hyper-aware of the trash that they're bombarded with online. This is one that not only our parents didn't have to deal with, but just looking at the ages of people here, I think most of us did not have to deal with this in high school or young adulthood. So I don't need to go through the laundry list of what's available online, but certainly a faith in God is under attack, and you can become even more selfish and say that Catholic faith in particular has come under attack. There's a real, for teenagers at least, there's a real susceptibility to peer pressure, and like exact quotes that I've had in my household. Dad, nobody really believes in God anymore. Really, nobody does. I mean, we go through the motions stuff, but nobody, like in their heart, really believes in God anymore. And that's from a 17-year-old who's been bombarded by our faith and been raised inside the church. It wasn't, I don't believe, it's Dad, nobody believes. I gotta let her know, I don't care about the nobody, I care about you. I'm raising you, so listen to me. And that's the problem, is the listen to me, because teenagers will, and we probably did it too, teenagers will always listen to and conform to the loudest or the most followed voice. Even if they never meet the speaker. When we were in high school, maybe it was the cool group that we saw and we admired on campus. Now it's the cool group with the fake lives that kids see on their phones. And very important here in the trash that the kids are bombarded with online, you do need to, you have time to do it, but you do need to talk to your kids about sex, drugs, and porn. You just have to. And I never found any helpful advice on how to make that a comfortable conversation. It is definitely uncomfortable, and it's definitely awkward. Then again, you've all like changed diapers and vomit and all kinds of other things that people without kids, would be amazed at what you do. So we signed up for uncomfortable conversations and uncomfortable encounters with our children. We signed up for that when we became kids. I think it's, for me personally, it was okay to provide reading materials to my teens and my young adults, but I always tried to appropriate those materials. I always tried to appropriate them as my voice by saying something like, oh yeah, Mom and Dad have read tons and tons of articles. This particular one, we kind of agree with. We think this is a decent one, and we'll forward text links or we'll have conversations on the phone about that. Don't be afraid to enlist a very cool aunt or a very cool uncle, because remember, you're not cool because you live with them and because you're their parents, which is by definition, you're a dork. But in some families, I have kind of a large family, there's a cool Aunt Heather, there's a cool Uncle John and stuff, they would never do this. So try, think about that if you have somebody, and then also a godparent. And this is probably a good point to remind those of us who are godparents. If you have children who are now teenagers, call those parents up and say, man, what an awkward conversation you have to have with your kids about not browsing porn and participating in porn. That must be really tough. And if your friend or your sibling, if the parent you're talking to says, yeah, I haven't had that conversation, be a good godparent and say, can I talk? Can I take my godchild out for a burger, or can I have a private FaceTime with them and have that conversation? The greatest harm that you can do to your children, there's almost nothing harmful that you can say to them in that conversation about sex, drugs, and porn. The worst thing that you can do, the greatest damage you can do, is not talk about it. So this is one of those cases in life where your inactivity is the absolute worst choice. Even if you have a wildly awkward, and it ends up in a fight, and your kids say, I never want to talk to you about that ever again. Or they run from you and say, Dad, get lost, I will only talk to Mom about that. At least by bringing it up, you're showing your kids, they'll sense your awkwardness, and they'll say, wow, I don't see this often from my parents. This must be something serious. I really should listen. Okay, so be hyper aware of the trash that are bombarded with online, and then, of course, modeling a good marriage. This assumes you have one. God's blessed you with children, and marriage is very much under attack. If you take a look at the divorce rates and the social acceptability and normalcy now of cohabitation of unmarried people. If you're married, talk to your kids. Why did you choose to commit to a marriage rather than just cohabitate with your life partner and decide to procreate? Because these are quite viable, socially acceptable alternatives to our children. And somebody else needs to get to talk about how to have a good marriage. That's incredibly difficult. But for those of us who've worked on it, letting your kids know that it's work, and you and your spouse are really having a disagreement and going at it, showing your kids, I was in the wrong, here's how I apologize, here's how Mom and I will work through this. And if you have an interfaith marriage, be sure to explain to your children how your spouse's faith and faith background, or in some cases, lack of a faith background, what kind of impact that's had on your marriage. There is a 50% or maybe greater chance that your child is going to grow up and be attracted to someone who's not Catholic. So again, you need to model that. I didn't, I was fortunate in that when I started to become attracted to my wife, who's not Catholic, it was, of course, the first question my dad asked when I told him I had a date. He wanted to know how Catholic she was and wanted to know what her parents did for a living. Letting your kids know, the word Catholic is universal, and how can we do everything that Jesus taught us to do in those 33 years if we shut non-Catholics out of our lives? Then the last one that I think is like a post-2000 point that we can all work on, or at least be aware of, is this being a good man or a good woman. It's a little bit different than modeling a very good working marriage. But role models today certainly do not represent the same strong men and strong women the way role models did for us in the 60s and 70s. And I acknowledge that the role models that we had, people didn't talk about the imperfect parts of their lives. So a lot of us probably grew up with role models that were no better and no worse than the role models of today. But today, those role models suffer from the same problem of trash online that our kids suffer. Our role models are imperfect human beings, and things happen to them, and their lives are splashed all over online. What that means, however, is that our kids are growing up and they're seeing people making a lot of money, being very popular, and doing things that we wouldn't approve of, and that role models one generation ago wouldn't do. Sons and daughters definitely see and observe how their fathers treat and talk about women. They just do. Again, sons and daughters both are impacted by how their fathers talk about and treat women. And the same is true, sons and daughters are also very affected by how they see their mothers treat and talk about and think about men. And this ranges, everything from power to sex, to the ideals, to what it is you look for. And your kids might ask you, why did you two marry each other? I think there's nothing wrong with saying, we were super attracted to each other physically, but there's a bunch of other things that we saw in each other. The conversation can't just stop with height and weight and measurements. How we speak about our neighbors, our relatives, our work colleagues. Boy, many of us have had to bring our office home. I don't know what you do for a living, but some of the work that I do is just not appropriate for inside of the house. So people will, your children will see how you relate to work colleagues, how you speak about and how you talk about politicians, how you speak about and talk about things as mundane as sports teams. All of this is subtle training to your children as to how your children will formulate their view of themselves as adults in this world. And it's funny, anytime when I do something that irks my mother, I just quickly turn around and say, I learned it from you. I learned it from you, or I learned it from Dad. And then the last thing I'll say about modeling being a good man or a good woman is that the world needs a lot more love. It kind of feels to me, maybe every generation has said this, but it really feels to me like hatred is at an incredible surplus, and love, at least openly expressed love, is at way more of a deficit. I loved after the Michigan-Ohio State game when Coach Jim Harbaugh, a great Catholic dad, was standing on the field, and Fox Sports had gotten their crew and the camera all down there. When they finally turned on and they said, let's go on the field right now, Harbaugh was just finishing hugging his quarterback, patting him on the back, no microphone on, and you could very clearly tell him, you could see Harbaugh telling the young guy, I love you, man, or something like that. I think the quarterback reciprocated. Harbaugh then turned to Fox Sports and said, interview this guy, and he walked away. It was a fantastic walk away. But we don't have enough people saying, I love you. And my daughters will tell me, oh, Dad, yeah, that's, my daughter lives in Lewis Hall. She lives in an all-women, 300 women dorm. We say that all the time. We begin our prayers that way. We love our sisters and stuff. And then, I'll ask my son and he'll say, not so much. But the world needs a lot more love, and we need a lot more young adults who will go out into the world looking for ways to show their love for other people, and then, of course, spotting and avoiding those situations that they know to be unloving and those behaviors that they know to be unloving. So, again, I think the points that we really have to focus on parenting in the current environment. Hyper-awareness over divisiveness. Don't let it seep into your house. Don't let it seep into the way your child thinks about his or her faith. Be hyper-aware of the garbage online. It's not that hard to do. You pay for the cell phone and you pay for the iPad, so be a jerk and just demand it from time to time and scroll through it. It cannot be a planned opportunity. Every Sunday at noon I go through your text messages. It has to be a random audit. And I think just you being aware of it, even if you don't say anything to your child about it, you might be a little shocked at what you see. Modeling a good marriage and then modeling being a good man for being a good woman. I think those are all key points. Not recommendations, not suggestions, and not advice, just things that I think about with raising a Catholic child today. Thoughts from anybody? We have enough to worry about, with this laundry list of concerns. I did not ask high school parents for that laundry list of concerns. I know you all have those concerns and 15 others, but it's so true when people say that this is the most important. We got one shot at it with each child, but this is the most important job that you will have. And God chose you for this child. As trying and as difficult as that child may be at times, there's a reason why God gave you that specific child into your specific family. 6 siblings go after each other, or kids will have failures in life, and they'll certainly disobey you, and you'll have lots of opportunities to tell them, I told you so. But it's a super important thing for us to do. And maybe you're like me in Mass. You sit down here and you listen to the homilies and you listen to the gospel, and you think, how does that relate to me as a parent? Because you will forever, including even after you're unable to take care of your kids, you're always going to be your kids' parents. So it's fantastic. We should have started in prayer, but let's end in prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the blessing of these children. We know that parenting is filled with its peaks and its valleys. When we're in those valleys, fill those valleys up, make them less deep by letting us reflect to our children the incredible and unconditional and never-ending love that you have for us. In your name we pray. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming.